Ryan, thank you for joining FinTech today. We're glad to have you on here. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'd love to really get your background on where you came from and what brought you to Messari over the long term and your background, your backstory, please.
Yeah, of course. I guess kind of the professional background is pretty short. I graduated from college in 2018. I studied finance, computer science, did about a year and a half of investment banking, and then joined Messari a little bit over a year ago, where I've just kind of been focusing on DeFi and stable coins, and then Bitcoin and Ethereum as well, just because they're kind of like the leading blockchains in the industry, kind of like revolves around those two assets. As far as crypto, I guess first time I heard about Bitcoin was through a friend who was using it for the Silk Road when I was in high school. Use case didn't really interest me, but it put on my radar so that if it came up in mainstream press, I would read about it. Now, granted, at the time it wasn't covered well, and on top of that, I wasn't that intellectually curious, so there's no reason to get into the space if there's no kind of catalyst. But yeah, it was on my radar. 2016 comes around, I'm on my campus. I hear people on Wall Street talk about this thing called blockchain technology. I didn't know at the time what they actually meant by that. They actually meant enterprise blockchain technology, but that'll be important in a second. But yeah, I thought it was cool, so I was like, all right, yeah, like let me go try to learn about this thing. So luckily, this kid on my campus started a cryptocurrency club, and he had 2 free tickets to go to Consensus in 2016, which is the world's largest blockchain conference. Like, all right, like cool, I'll go and do this. I helped out with the hackathon the weekend before, just so I could get the free tickets, and then went to the conference. Didn't understand anything. Not only was it just like it seemed like the use cases were so broad, it was hard to understand what's going on. But then on top of that, the entire focus of the conference was on enterprise blockchain technology. And I didn't get why people were comparing what seemed like an enterprise database technology to the internet. It just didn't make sense to me. It seemed like, why are we getting excited about tracking tomatoes on a blockchain? It was dumb.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until 2017 I'm interning, in investment banking, and I see a headline comes across my desk that says Ethereum's up 2,500% a year. And I'm like, what the hell is Ethereum? Because I actually thought that like all the cryptocurrencies supposed to be scams, and on top of that, so it wasn't just a price action that kind of excited me. It was also the fact that it was so polarizing. So anyone who had an opinion on it was either in the camp of this is a bubble, it's tulips, it's a scam, it's used for criminals, it's all going to blow up, or this is going to change the world. And when I saw that, I was just like, all right, something is going on here, and I just want to figure out, at the very least, it's going to answer for myself. So that's what I did. Just kind of spent my senior year going down the rabbit hole, kind of like learning and answering those questions about, what is money? Where does it come from? Why does it exist? Things I just had not considered living in the United States, because United States. I mean, as much as some people in the space would debate, like our monetary system is stable. Like I don't have to think about what the value of my dollar in the bank account will be tomorrow. So I just never thought about that. But meanwhile, this is like kind of a fundamental building block of society that I had never even questioned. So that was pretty exciting to go down. And I think the second part that was fascinating was learning about the concept of decentralization, which was very counterintuitive, because here you had, throughout my entire life, every single institution that I dealt with, there was some kind of central authority that established order in how this system works. And then you had these decentralized systems like Bitcoin and Ethereum, where there was no central authority. There still was order and there still were rules, right? And that was fascinating to me, and I didn't understand it. So once I got that, like I was really excited about this stuff, from at least from an intellectual perspective. And then once I actually learned about Ethereum and learned about all the applications that are being built on top of it, and saw that as ambitious as it was for this industry to attempt to reimagine money, it actually went beyond just money. And you're talking about, reinventing the entire financial system, or many of these other institutions that we have, right? I thought like, wow, like this stuff is actually going to change the world, and I need to be part of this industry. So at that point, I was pretty dedicated to going in, and just started, blasting out emails to people, going to conferences, trying to meet as many people as possible until I landed my way at Messari.
Fascinating. So what I really want to do is back up a little bit and understand before we jump into these awesome topics you've kind of given us a preview over is what is Messari doing? Let's understand where you are currently and what they're trying to do. If you could help us with that, please.
Yeah, so Messari, I guess the easy analogy is kind of like a Bloomberg for cryptocurrencies. So you can think of like data and analytics tools to help people make sense of the markets, whether it be like actually markets data or like on-chain data, so data you pull from the blockchains themselves. So I try to get a sense of what's going on in the kind of blockchain economy,
Mm,
right? Like how are
right.
these applications being used? How much are they being used? Things like that. That's one part of the business. The other part is really research, right? And this is kind of like equity research style coverage for these assets, kind of like you see in investment bank, where we're doing fundamental analysis on assets and trends to uh, basically give people a framework for how to think about these assets from like a competitive perspective, from a valuation perspective, things like that. And then we also have another service called the Enterprise, which is kind of like an alerting service that will provide, people like any stakeholder, but like mainly like funds and custodians and exchanges and those kind of guys like uh, alerts on the assets that they have exposure to. So if there's like a big upcoming upgrade for a protocol they support, or like some kind of vote, or like there's a hack or fork, like all these major events, this is like a service that kind of like lets you know, like, hey, this asset you support and you hold $1 billion of tokens, like, yeah, it just got hacked. So you probably want to know about that.
Mm.
So that's kind of like the high level overview. I'm sorry. Now, what I do personally, I do research there, so I'm really just kind of in the weeds, trying to understand, all the trends in this industry, what assets are interesting, how much are they worth, really those kind of questions.
Awesome. And that's it's such a great overview because this is exactly why we wanted to have you on was because you're we a lot of people I think look up to you as essentially the expert because you're doing the most research and you're around other people trying to do that granular style research. It's incredibly hard and especially in such a young space, it's so difficult to understand what is valuable. Like how do we even evaluate these valuations on all these new protocols and tokens? So this is it's awesome. But before we dive into this further, what I'm trying to understand more is in terms of our first principles approach, what's been the best way for you to really describe to the normal people, the layman out there that really don't understand crypto at all? What's the best way to describe to people? Maybe a great analogy. What's the story you tell to many people without describing blockchain or anything like that? Why should we be excited about crypto?
Yeah,
Tough question.
no, it is, but I think I'll talk about basically what gets me excited, without using any of the jargon.
Mm,
And I guess what gets me excited about this industry is that I think over the past, I mean, probably a little bit longer than this, but over the past couple of decades, especially in the United States, we've seen a decline in trust in institutions, especially among younger generations, where whether it be the financial crisis or politics or our technology corporations, we're starting to lose trust in them for a variety of reasons. And at the core of it is this idea that there are people in positions of power who are making decisions that affect everyone that don't always have our best interests in mind. Um, and we feel like the system doesn't work for us, right? Like
right.
there's massive wealth inequality. It seems like sometimes it's lack of opportunity. So like when you ask like anyone in our generation, like, hey, what do you think about these big investment banks? They're probably going to be like, yeah, I don't trust them, or
Right.
like, hey, they're rent seekers, or
Mm-hmm.
they're like evil, whatever it may be, however warranted. And what I say for this kind of crypto, generally speaking, is it represents an opportunity to create new institutions that are global. So they're no longer siloed into specific geographic regions.
Mhm.
They are open, as in anyone can use them. So it doesn't matter, like I said, if you're in a certain state, it doesn't matter if you have, doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter your race, your ethnicity, your religion, etc. They are neutral. So because of the fact that these institutions don't have figureheads that are running the show, and people have their biases, whether it be because they follow some kind of higher power, right? Because like maybe they're regulated by a specific government, and that government has its own agenda. Maybe they're motivated by a profit motive, and they are caring about themselves. The difference, these systems are governed by everyone and no one at the same time. They're kind of just like this public infrastructure that it just is ultra liable and treats everyone kind of indiscriminately,
This
right?
is yeah, this is fascinating. I'm so glad you're hitting on these important principles of crypto. And what I really want to understand also is like if we back up to 2017 and help our newer listeners who maybe aren't familiar with crypto, back up to 2017, it was like the speculator's game, right? And it's in the
Yeah,
name, cryptocurrency. A lot of people look at currencies and they say, well, how is currency effective or useful, right? How is it a platform? And I think that's the confusion that remains. At least, let's say it's a terrible stigma to have, right? Moving
yeah.
forward and building new platforms. And I think when I read, you shared it on your Twitter, I believe, a few months back about what was it? The article was called, I think, "Crypto Networks and the Theory of the Firm" by I think it's Chow Wang, who's also
Mm-hmm.
ex Messari. Brilliant read that really describes this is something beyond a speculator's game. This is beyond the central, the aspects of just speculating on the price going up or down, all these things. This is about usefulness as a protocol, as a platform. If you could break down like more of that, how does that work? Like the incentive structure, like the theory of the firm, that article, if you could help us understand why is it so impactful? Like how do these protocols work essentially? Break it down, and why are they so hard to compete with? I think is really in the future, decentralized versus centralized is really what I'm asking.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point about cryptocurrency almost being a misnomer for this industry and actually being misleading because the overwhelming majority of these assets actually aren't currencies and they don't have anything to do with money,
Hmm.
right? So I think that's a key thing that I think many people when they're first getting in 2017 or first hearing about this first time, and then they see Bitcoin and they go on like Coin Market Cap or something and they see like, oh wow, there's like 1,000 cryptocurrencies. This sounds ridiculous. Like, what is the point? Um, but not everyone is like that, right? Like, yes, you do have assets like Bitcoin, which are supposed to be these kind of like money-like assets where you can store value in them, you can use them to pay for things, etc. Or at least that's ideal. But then there's also a wide range of assets that actually do not do that, right? And I guess one sector of this industry that I think is a testament to this is what's called DeFi, which is short for decentralized finance. And these are projects that are attempting to basically recreate our entire financial system and all of our financial institutions, but they're replacing them with code, right? So they're replacing kind of like these legal entities and people who are parties to legal entities with code, right? So these are things like banks, exchanges, insurance firms, you name it.
Mm.
These are projects that are attempting to do that. Now, where does the token come involved? Well, you may have this project, and this project will exist as code, and this code will allow you to say, exchange assets between each other. So it's just like a Coinbase, except a Coinbase that is implemented just purely as code that anyone can access,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then where a token may come in is the token may be what's used to actually govern this project. So you think about it, okay, you have code and it allows you to do something. Well, how does that code change? Like who makes the decisions, right? Well, this is kind of where the token comes in, and that's what coordinates people to make decisions, right? So if you hold a token, then like you can propose changes to the project. You can vote on changes to the project. you can capture fees that the project generates. So in that sense, it's like almost like a stock in a sense, except
Hmm.
it's more powerful than a stock because instead of, I guess with the stock there being different layers in between stockholders and then the ultimate operations of the business,
Right.
uh, a token like allows you to directly control this business. So it's like the difference between being a shareholder in Amazon and
Jeff Bezos himself, right?
exactly, like
Yeah.
exactly. So like it's like it'd be like if you held shares in Apple and then you could vote on the price of their next iPhone, or you can say like, hey, you know what, Apple, you guys should go and acquire Netflix, or hey, like you should go and enter the self-driving car sector, whatever it may be, right? Like that's the level of power and control and discretion you have as a token holder versus a stockholder. Um, yeah, so that's probably one of the biggest kind of aha moments is kind of like saying like, okay, well, it's not all about currency, right? So once we've established that, it's like how do these protocols work, right? How does one of these decentralized finance projects work, right?
Hmm.
Well, like I said, um, they're usually built upon Ethereum, right? And Ethereum is basically a platform which you can build applications on top of. A fundamental building block that you use to build these applications on Ethereum are these things called smart contracts. And smart contracts are basically like digital agreements that are self-executing. So what does that mean?
It's
You write
automated. It's automated, right?
it's automated, exactly. So you write code on Ethereum that says if X happens, then Y, right? And if someone interacts with that piece of code you wrote and it performs some action, well, there will be some counter action, right? That based on the input, right? Uh, so using these kind of like digital agreements, well, if there's some like theory of the firm where it's kind of like this, all a firm is kind of like a nexus of contracts.
Hmm.
Well, in the most abstract sense. So you can kind of use this basic building block of contracts to go and build a bunch of different applications. Like I said, one of which is an exchange. And this exchange says, hey, if you trade this asset, you can get this asset in return, right? And it's just a way of kind of structuring that agreement between people. So you can kind of use these contracts and, like I said, put them together, build applications, and then have these applications build on top of each other. It gets a little bit crazy at a certain point, like how much these applications can actually interoperate with each other. But that is kind of like the general idea of what's going on in the decentralized finance space.
Moving on here, though, in terms of Bitcoin, I really want to dig into your thoughts on Bitcoin. I saw a recent tweet of yours. It was really interesting. We'll jump into that here in a second after this question. I think what I'm really curious to hear is your opinion on what's the importance of Bitcoin to the entire digital asset space. I mean, obviously, I think we know it as a store of value, but like when I ask the question, what's its importance? Like, what's its role? Is it playing? It. I assume there's so many other opinions you can put upon it besides just a store of value.
Yeah. Uh, well, it is the most historically important because it is the first. It kind of introduced many of the foundational concepts of this industry, and that alone is why it can be considered important, kind of as the starting point of the revolution in a sense. But beyond just this kind of historical significance, I really just think that uh, of every single cryptocurrency that's out there, and once again, sorry for using the misnomer, but of every single cryptocurrency that's out there, it is the uh, longest running one with the most kind of history of operating securely over time, right? So it's kind of built its reputation as being extremely reliable and insecure. I mean, at this point, like the Bitcoin blockchain secures over $1 trillion of value,
Mm.
and it has never been hacked,
Right.
right?
And it's just seen as digital gold, right? And I think that's such a huge phrase as to so many people. It's become like almost the marketing um, for all of the rest of the digital asset space. Is that a correct assumption to make? Essentially,
It,
like essentially bringing people to further down the risk curve, right? Like there's Ethereum after Bitcoin, right? It's the rabbit hole. I think Bitcoin is like the ultimate starter point, right?
it is. I think, especially for investors, it is. It's just the easiest kind of cryptocurrency to understand. It's really simple. Like Bitcoin is kind of like a dumb and slow network. Like,
Yeah, I know how you
you
feel
know,
there.
it's
Yeah,
just, it's just very, I mean, I say that kind of like jokingly, but like it's the easiest cryptocurrency to understand. It really doesn't do anything. Like you just hold it
right.
and like no one can take away from you and it's secure, fixed supply, all the things you always hear, right? It's just a very simple thing to underwrite.
The reason why I
But
wanted to bring up this topic is because one of the recent tweets you had I thought was super interesting was, Bitcoin brings a digital asset class to investors, but Ethereum brings the asset class to the people. And this is why I really
yeah,
wanted to drive deeper into like that thought process. I really want to unpack that a little bit more, if you could, please.
yeah, of course. Yeah. So when you think about like gold as an asset, uh, outside of people using it as like jewelry, uh, most people don't think about gold. Like gold is not a part of their life, right?
Right.
Gold in many cases is a speculative asset that investors use, right? They use it to hedge against geopolitical risks. They use to hedge against inflation, right? But these are all things that, like I said, mainly investors care about. You go and ask, like, I'll ask any of my friends, like, yo, like, what do you think about gold? And they nothing. I don't think about it. Um, and I think like so that I'm not saying that like it's not like it doesn't play an important role in like an investment portfolio or it play an important role in like a global monetary system at large. But I'm just saying like for many people like gold it just doesn't, it's not a part of their life. They just don't think about it.
Right.
Now the
And
difference with Ethereum is that it's not just this kind of monetary store of value use case it's going after. Uh, in some cases, there's things like finance, which people use every day. Like people borrow money, people speculate on assets through exchanges. People will deposit their money into banks to earn yields, right? People buy insurance. I mean, the list goes on. Like these are all things that you can do on Ethereum, right? On top of that, there's also this other sector, kind of like uh, NFTs, and these are things what falls in the category of things like digital art and gaming, right? And these are things that people use all the time, right? Like gaming. I mean, virtual land. Like these are. I mean, ask like anyone who's under age 18, they're all playing video games, right?
yeah,
Or
they're playing too much of it probably too.
exactly, or art. Like it's just like a different demographic of people who, when they get confronted with something like Bitcoin, it's just going to go over their head, right? Because you're, I mean, it's one thing to say like it's fixed supply. It's another thing to actually understand like why it actually matters,
Right.
right? But then if you go and explain to someone, oh yeah, like well here is it's like digital art on Ethereum where you can track the ownership of and prove the scarcity of something that is like a digital piece of art. Well, not only is that fascinating, but that actually gets people in the door who don't really care to bet on the future of the monetary system. They just want a cooler way of expressing themselves,
Hmm.
right? So I think the point of that tweet was really to say that uh, Bitcoin it's a very narrow use case, and I think it's an important one. But what I think has the potential to attract more people to the space is Ethereum because of the fact that you have all of these different use cases that appeal to different people with different interests, right? That are not necessarily financial or monetary in nature.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Um, which this gets me just budding with curiosity now, more so because I really want to hear what your thought is on if Ethereum it could eventually pass Bitcoin. I mean, I think this is being floated around a little bit. This question, I'm curious if you think that's possible, and also if that were to happen, what do you think it would take, in your opinion?
I definitely think it is possible,
Hmm.
and if it were to
Pass and
happen,
price, correct, right? That's excuse me. I just wanted to cut you out. I just wanted to make sure that's clear. Pass and
yeah,
price.
as in like, yeah, Ethereum being worth more than Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do think it's possible. I don't know if or when that happens,
Right.
but I do think it's possible. And I think the way it would happen is really twofold. One is more of a like appeal to like a technical side of it, where uh, the selling point of Bitcoin versus Ethereum as a store value asset boils down to its monetary policy being very predictable and the Bitcoin blockchain being very secure. And I think that with the shift to Ethereum 2.0 and proof of stake, which is kind of like a new way of securing
Blockchain.
the
Yeah.
Ethereum blockchain, um, Ethereum may actually potentially be more secure than Bitcoin. And Ethereum's monetary policy will actually change in Ethereum 2.0 so that it actually won't just be less inflationary than Bitcoin, it'll actually be deflationary, right? So then every year, there's actually less and less and less Ether in existence because it's being burned,
In terms of
right?
token supply, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in which case, well, if Ethereum is more secure and it is more as like a stronger monetary policy, well, then what is the bull case for Bitcoin in that scenario,
Mm.
right? And then when you combine that with, I think, which is the second part of kind of the, how this has happened, which is uh, Ethereum has this, massive and booming and diverse economy that's being built on top of it, which are all these applications that are providing all these different, digital goods and services to people. That it just that ecosystem uh, could bring in more people. So maybe I'll zoom up as well and say that, like, when I think about like what has potential to become money in the long term, and when I say money, I don't mean like gold. I mean gold is definitely a monetary asset, but
Mm.
like it's not money in the sense of like you go to a store with some gold and you buy like a slice of pizza with it. Like no one's doing that. That's ridiculous. People just use gold, like I said, to kind of like speculate, right? Or to store value when they're afraid of geopolitics or inflation, right? But the money that we actually use is like what we use to spend, right? That's like the dollar.
Yeah.
And to me, like it seems very unlikely that at large, many countries will like adopt Bitcoin as a currency that people use to pay for things. And I think one is because they always want control of their monetary policy and their currency. And two, I don't think it's likely that Bitcoin becomes stable anytime soon, right? And part of it is just because it's early. The other part of it is because it's fixed supply, right? So supply can adjust to meet demand. Now, Ethereum is a little bit different. The way Ethereum becomes money is not actually by being adopted by countries as like a currency. The way it becomes money is actually by building its own economy. And what I mean by that is like, just like how the United States has an economy, or the United Kingdom has an economy, or China has an economy, Ethereum has an economy too, right? And in this economy, like I said, there's financial institutions, there's technology institutions, there is art, all these different things that people can do, right? These things produce value. People can earn livings in this economy, right?
Mm.
So at a certain point, the economy in Ethereum begins to attract so much capital, both human capital and financial capital, that it is actually a force in the global economy, right? It is like the GDP of Ethereum is actually rivaling many largest countries.
Right.
And when you combine that with the fact that you have these kind of like applications built on top of Ethereum that have designed a way to effectively stabilize the value of Ethereum so that it's actually useful. These things are called like stable coins. And like you can like predictably store value in them and use them to price things like contracts and use them to spend through money. Well, at that point, I actually think that Ethereum is actually winning because not because everyone else is adopting it, because there's so much global demand to like pour money into the Ethereum economy that people just need Ether to spend money in the Ethereum economy, right? It's just how you if you go to any country in the world, you need their currency to use it. And if that's a scenario that I think is possible, then at that point, like to me, that sounds like Ethereum it wins and it's worth more than Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is kind of this niche digital gold like asset, whereas Ethereum is actually the money of the Ethereum economy, which is one of the world's largest economies. So,
And growing, correct? Like, I mean,
and,
that's the idea. That's the whole bull case. It's just growing tremendously, but we're just in the very beginning stages. Is what's the scary part about this, right? I mean,
here's
we're
the thing,
great
like
news about it, right?
yeah, so we are in the beginning, but at the same time, like Ethereum has done $2 trillion in transactions over the past year, right? Massive. I mean, that sounds insane for something that it's a number that you probably wouldn't even think Ethereum had done during that period of time. That's massive. Like the scale at which uh, Ethereum is already kind of reached is already impressive, and it's growing extremely fast. I mean, that number that last 12 months transaction volume, even a year ago, was like orders of magnitude less, right? It wasn't even close. It's literally just going like it's like the classic hockey stick growth chart where this thing is just going absolutely parabolic.
Yeah, it's
Um,
network effects. It just
it's
doesn't end,
exciting.
right? Yeah. So, okay, that prompts me to ask questions that where we can move further down the crypto rabbit hole. I really want to discover. Let's first understand the pillars of this new financial ecosystem. You mentioned it earlier. It's DeFi, right? Decentralized finance, DeFi for short. Um, so help me understand the pillars. Like I'll name one. I know that one of the pillars is stable coins, but
Yep.
there's also there's derivatives. There's what are the main pillars of DeFi? If you could help us with that.
Yeah. So yeah, stable coins for sure. And basically that's just a way of storing value on Ethereum in a stable currency. Because like one of the problems with cryptocurrencies is that they're
It's
like
too volatile.
volatile as hell. Yeah. So like you can't like predict before valuing them. So that's one pillar. Another pillar is kind of decentralized exchange. And that is just a place where you can exchange assets that are listed on Ethereum. So, if you want to swap one token for another, this is a place where you can go.
So think
Um,
Coinbase, but decentralized.
exactly, Coinbase, but decentralized.
Yeah.
And then just one pillar. Another pillar is lending, like borrowing and lending, right? So there's credit markets, and uh, that's kind of like one of those. Another one is derivatives. So these kind of these assets that kind of price risk and kind of derive their values from some kind of underlying asset. That's huge. I mean, in the traditional finance, derivatives are like, and it's like one of those things where like you hear like the notional value, it's like quadrillions, right? Um,
Yeah.
it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
Uh, Another one would be I touched on stable coins,
Lending
exchange,
markets,
lending,
derivatives. Yeah. It sounds like Wall
derivatives.
Street 2.0 is what we're talking about essentially. I know that's not the perfect analogy, but like if you really see what Wall Street does and you see what's happening with projects like Synthetics, Compound, and Aave, it's very bewildering, to be honest. And then you go and see, this is where I think that's really fascinating is why aren't these protocols or decentralized networks, if you will, why aren't they getting any attention? Because their valuations to me are skyrocketing right now. I mean, they've fallen between like 2 to 8 billion right now, and I'm referring mainly to like Synthetics and Compound and Aave, and one of them has a phenomenal backer who's been a Bitcoiner, let's say, for 8 9 years, which is Andreessen Horowitz, among a few others that have set up in their own venture capital firms around building out this DeFi space. And Compound is that one of those protocols. Why aren't these protocols getting more attention? Do we need to name them unicorns? Like what's the what's the catch here? Because I look at DoorDash and I see DoorDash that just went public, and I get this feeling they may never go they may never be profitable. And you see what, Decentralized Exchange Uniswap is making, on the trade. It's like, I think it's 30 BPS per trade or something like that, point 0.3. And it's just like when you look at price to book or however you evaluate the price of the token, it's like, why aren't these things worth more? It's
Yeah.
so hard to understand. If you could please help us unpack, why aren't these getting attention? Why aren't they worth more? And I assume that means they have much more room to run.
Yeah, no, it is funny because, you know, when I talk to people from traditional finance about this industry, and, intuitively they understand how the financial industry is ripe for disruption and is kind of like a late adopter of technology. And then when I tell them that, like, okay, we have this new, uh, this new sector of crypto that is growing like triple, if not quadruple percentages year over year. Uh, these protocols are profitable, even though they're like in some cases less than a year old.
And they have like
Uh,
less than 5 employees sometimes, right? Or like less than 10, right? I'm
exactly,
sorry to
they
cut you off,
are.
but it's such a huge, important factor, right? Like they don't have to scale with employees, right?
Yeah, they're incredibly scalable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually crazy. Like there are some protocols out there that are like 6 months old, worth $1 billion, making tens of millions of dollars a year, if not even more, and they didn't raise a dime of venture capital. They didn't raise any money in some
Yeah.
cases. It's like it's ridiculous, and like, they literally have like maybe like 5 or 10 people working on it. Um, so and then on top of that, you can compare their valuations, or their market valuations relative to the cash flow they're producing,
Mm.
and the growth they're seeing, and you're like, oh wow, this stuff is in some cases actually extremely undervalued, right? I mean, like in some cases you can like buy one of these early stage protocols, right, that is growing like hundreds of percentages a year for a cheaper valuation than some companies in the S&P 500, right? In some cases, you can buy them for like distressed multiples, right? In some cases, you can buy them for like valuations you get if you were to buy like a utility company that's growing 0% a year, right? And there's nothing excited about it, which is insane, right? Um, so I mean, part of it's just like an awareness thing, because I mean, if you think about even just like a year ago, back in March, uh, many of these many of the most exciting projects actually didn't exist, and then two, uh, if they did exist, like there wasn't a ton of traction, right? I mean, back a year ago, Uniswap was doing about, call it 10, $15 million in volume a day. It's now doing a billion,
Mm.
right? It's just the growth has been absolutely insane. I mean, you're talking about like literally like 100x growth in a year, for Uniswap. Um, so yeah, as far as just awareness, and I think that's changing very rapidly. Bitcoin has definitely, raised uh, interest in this industry again, and people are starting to dip their toes. And obviously, once you get into Bitcoin, you're like, okay, well, what else is there? Like, it kind of opens your mind to the idea that there's value in this asset class. So the next thing you go and do, you go to Ethereum, and you're like, oh, well, why is Ethereum valuable? It's like, oh yeah, there's all these applications being built on top of it. It's like, oh, like what about these applications, right? And you see DeFi, and they're like, oh wow, well,
It
this stuff
never
is
ends. It
yeah,
never
and
ends.
you
It
just go
just
down the
keeps
rabbit
going.
hole.
Yeah. You,
And I
you
think
suddenly
people
become
are,
Alice. You just can't climb out. It's really interesting.
yeah.
And is it a proper analogy to say, like, I guess Ethereum is kind of like the iOS App Store, except the fact that obviously it's decentralized. It's not owned by, let's say, a profit-seeking institution, obviously like Apple, because everything's built upon, well, not everything, almost everything, whatever it is, and everything is typically built upon Ethereum, and all the developers and the talent and the brain space is there. Is that correct? Right?
Yeah, no, I think this is a decent analogy, because you're right. There are like many, if not most, of the most exciting applications in this industry are built on top of Ethereum. And yeah, you almost can think about it as like a decentralized app store in a sense.
Moving on here. So something I found super fascinating because uh, Mike Novogratz, I'm sure you've heard of him at Galaxy over at
Yeah.
Galaxy Digital. he said something that was very interesting on Real Vision a few weeks ago, that he thought um, fintech, what DeFi is now, will be fintech in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. He basically just gave a guess. Um, and there's these core people that still exist that think, there's a huge discerning area of like, this is DeFi, this is, that's crypto, and then this is fintech, where it's like still dealing with intermediaries and banking institutions and front end software and UX stuff. I'm curious to hear, like, what do you think that opinion by Mike Novogratz is wrong? Is it faulty, or is DeFi really the future of fintech?
I do think it is, because I think one of the things about fintech that we've seen this over the past decade is that in many cases, and that's not to take anything away from any of the fintech companies that have been built over the past decade, but in many cases they're just kind of like front ends built on top of existing financial rails. Like, it's not actually like a fundamental overhaul of the financial system. And that's the difference here, is that you're literally building alternative financial rails on Ethereum, like from the ground up, like everything from the absolute bedrock of the financial system, which is like the money, right? Like a central bank. You're recreating that with like Bitcoin, Ethereum, settlement systems. Those are things like FedWire, ACH, the DTCC, like all these things, right? It's building it from the ground up, right? So it is literally something entirely different, like an entirely different stack of financial and monetary protocols.
Mm-hmm.
That offer some advantages, right? Like that we kind of discussed it in the beginning. And I think that what will end up happening is many of these protocols that we kind of mentioned that do things like exchange and derivatives and lending, these will kind of be like these kind of core internet protocols that anyone can build on top of. So now there will be like many different front ends that use these applications, rather than just being a front end that is built on top of the existing banks,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense, and that is very likely. I mean, hopefully, if this industry is successful, then yeah, like
Then
it will
it
eventually
will
become,
happen.
yeah,
Yeah.
it will become fintech for sure.
It's interesting. That's the second one I can confirm of someone who's deep in the industry. I'm on that trail to figure it. I want to hear more people confirm that, because I feel that too deep down. It's just I'm not in and around the trenches here doing the research as much as you guys are. So, moving on to our next question here is, what do you think the important milestones are for DeFi to hit to keep this parabolic growth going? What is there a specific milestone or objective you guys look at Messari currently?
So I don't necessarily have like a specific milestone. I mean, one nice round number that I would love to see hit is $100 billion in total value locked, which, I mean, we're only I want to say like 33% of the way there now, or
In
33
total value locked in DeFi, correct?
in DeFi across all
The applications.
blockchains.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So if that were to reach, like I said, 100 billion, which we're actually pretty close. I think we're on like 75 billion now, if you include applications that are not on Ethereum as well, which is pretty cool. That'd be a major milestone. I mean, it's kind of a crazy thing to think about, right? Like, people are storing $100 billion in value in these smart contracts. That'd be a milestone. I think besides that, I mean, I think it just depends on the sector, right? So I'll give you an example. So for decentralized exchanges, over the summer, I think it was actually in September, Uniswap at a certain point actually reached its volumes reached parity with Coinbase. So that means on a daily basis, Uniswap was doing as much volume as Coinbase, which is pretty incredible. So I mean, we all know like Coinbase is about to go public at probably like $100 billion valuation. Like, this is a massively important and successful company. And here's this like decentralized protocol that was built by a dude who received a Uniswap grant and is like his mid-20s, and is running on decentralized infrastructure that is rivaling it. So I think one thing for decentralized exchanges, I think that next milestone we'd like to see is can they reach a level where they not just will get back to kind of being at parity with Coinbase, but can they actually start to rival like the absolute largest exchanges in this industry, like Binance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would that be possible, right? That would be like a major milestone, and that would kind of be a turning point for this industry where it's like, oh wow, you know what? This industry is no longer reliant on these centralized entities to exchange assets between each other. Like we can all do it through like these kind of decentralized rails that anyone can access.
Something that's been on my mind though is yes, we know Uniswap could grow and easily overcome Coinbase eventually, maybe. But the thing is that we've yet to really understand, I think, is the arrival of regulation, because there's no what's the crypto industry phrase, KYC, where know your customer. It's so key, where the government knows, who's signing up through the back end of Coinbase, and then Coinbase can, like, not necessarily track you, but understand who their customer is. And how does Uniswap go about that in the future to fend off governments left and right? Because Coinbase can essentially shake the hand of politicians and governors and all this sorts to really make sure they're in the good light, right?
Yeah.
Is it too
So
too early of a question?
I think we'll end up seeing. Yeah, I think we'll see what ends up happening as far as that front. I mean, it is kind of like a new territory, because you have like, I mean, your counterparty is code. It's not actually like a individual or some kind of legal entity,
Right.
and it's unclear, what implications that has. And then I think for something like Coinbase, like where it's actually directly interacting with the traditional financial system, right? Like you can connect your bank account and get fiat currency on there.
Mhm.
So that's something where, like, of course, there's going to be, stringent regulations, because you're actually interacting with, like I said, the legacy financial rails. But the second you get into crypto, the crypto financial rails, and you're moving value between different blockchains or moving value between different protocols, that is just kind of new territory, where like it's literally just like you interacting with the code freely. And who, I don't know what happens. Hopefully, in places like the United States, they take a well, first, hopefully they're open-minded. Two, hopefully they kind of take a hands-off approach that lets the industry grow, so that they don't potentially hamstring an industry and a technology which I believe has a ton of promise.
Yeah, that's interesting. Moving on here, the studious investor, I'm sure you've heard of him, Santiago Santos, over at
Yeah.
Parify Capital. He had a fantastic tweet the other day that I really wanted to get your thoughts on, and just see what you know about the industry and where you think it's going to head in the next few years. He said in this tweet, he says, it says most won't understand, or most don't understand crypto, let alone the decentralized finance space, and likely never will. But many will start using crypto within the next 5 years or so without even noticing it. I just would really love to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening already. Like, and actually, it relates to a point we kind of talked about with fintech. How eventually fintech will just be, or DeFi will be fintech, and there'll be like different front ends that like leverage blockchains on the back end. And it's already happening. So there's one really good example I like to tell people about, which is called Terra. And Terra is a Korean-based project. It's basically, Terra is its own blockchain. It has like high transaction throughput, so you can make a ton of payments on it. And this blockchain has its own stable coins, right? Um, Now, this blockchain is the backend for a very popular payments app called Chai, which has over 2 million users, is growing very fast, and it's a way for merchants to accept online merchants to accept payments, right? And it's seen incredible adoption so far, and they create a user experience where it's very easy for someone to use, right? Like no one actually really knows that they're like transacting, or that their transaction being settled over a blockchain. Um, but you get the benefits of it, right? So like the benefit for merchants is that instead of being charged, very high,
Visa fees.
interchange fees, yeah, like
Yeah.
they kind of cut those out. So it's like they save, a percent or two on every single transaction, which is obviously huge for them, right? Um, and I think that's kind of like it's kind of like a window into the future of like what I think it'll look like as some of these other DeFi protocols, scale, is a kind of a similar experience where, if you want to go and get like yield from DeFi. Like maybe there'll be a simple front end that you can deposit into like a Yearn vault, and it'll go and get you the highest yields on Ethereum for you, right? It'll be super abstracted. Maybe you want to go and swap between some cryptocurrency you have another one. Well, maybe like there's just some basic interface in your phone where like you can just do that, and then on the back end this happens. Maybe you want to go in, borrow money, and you hold assets already. Like you can just, I mean, it's just making ways of making stuff like very simple and accessible for people, and I think that's likely to happen.
Without us even noticing it, essentially. We just have to continue to abstract it away. It's kind of like what HTTP did for the internet, right? Where instead of going to a website and sometime in the 90s where we typed in numbers to get to that website, we now can put some marketing behind it, right? With the HTTP protocol. And now we can go to www.google.com, right? Like that's the next step, right? We have to abstract away all these like wallet addresses and just clunky names and things of that nature, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. So NFTs, before we head out here soon, NFTs, really wanted to get some of your takes on NFTs. First question, I mean, are NFTs going to push the crypto mainstream? Like, I mean, they're essentially just huge culture grabs, right? I mean, like they're huge ploys into culture where, they're talking to artists. Or I was scrolling through TikTok the other day and just seeing like people say that I'm selling my NFT, and everyone's like, well, what the hell is an NFT, right? And it's
Yeah.
funny because there's this incredible, very interesting moment where you have so many people trying to understand it, but um, they love hearing the idea that they can make money selling their art. And you mentioned it earlier, but is NFT the capability of it? Is that what's going to push crypto mainstream in your opinion?
So I have a couple of thoughts here. So one would be, so NFT, although I think it oftentimes just gets like reduced into just like digital art and digital and collectibles. NFT is just like a type of token on Ethereum that really just means like a unique token, right? And you can use NFTs for many things beyond just digital art and collectibles. Like you can create like loan agreements using an NFT, right? You create like an insurance contract using an NFT, right? These are like unique contracts between two counterparties, right? That can be represented by a unique token. So that as a basic kind of token type, obviously I think has a ton of potential, right? Like, and it is part of the decentralized finance story. Um, Now, specifically on digital art and collectibles, which I think is kind of this that will have people most excited about right now. Um, so I do think it will bring, and it is bringing, cryptocurrency mainstream, because it's just like whether it be like something like NBA Top Shots or some celebrity selling some digital art on one of these NFT platforms. It is raising awareness of uh, a compelling use case for this technology that people just weren't aware of. And like, and kind of like what I said before, is it kind of just like it's an alternative way for people to get excited about this space beyond just like the monetary and financial implications of it, right? So not everyone wants to go and trade derivatives, or even knows what the hell a derivative is. Like not everyone
Mm-hmm.
wants to go and buy digital gold, but you can actually tap into the creatives of this world when you start talking about digital art, and you start talking about like new ways of distributing music or anything of that sort, right? And that's very exciting. Now that being said, um, uh, and I don't want to say it's to take away from anything in this in kind of the NFT sector,
Mm.
but I do think it is getting overheated, and the reason why I say that is because one is just like what people are getting excited about now right now is really just being able to buy like certain people's like art, and like being able to trade like collectibles on like for like NBA Top Shots. And while that is exciting, um, that's not like the biggest
Use
potential
case.
market.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then on top of that, I don't think the like experiences built around these objects are advanced enough so that you can actually do things with them at this point,
Right.
right?
It's
I
in the
think I think
word
right now
collectibles, right?
exactly. I think right now it's like it's just a ton of like speculation at this point where people see that oh wow, this NFT artist just, people bought their NFT and then at 100x, like I'm gonna go and try and FOMO into the next one, right? And that's part of what's driving a lot of the activity. Um, but I think that's just part of the process, right? It happened with Ethereum in 2017, right? Like all the ICOs, I mean, a lot of stuff was vaporware. A lot of stuff was just idea stage. None of the applications worked, right? But within that was the potential to create what we see today, which are working DeFi applications that are doing significant volumes, that have product market fit, that
Hmm.
are that are very exciting. And I think it's probably the same thing with NFTs, although probably in a shortened time horizon, right? Because that there is stuff that works today, right? Like there are digital art marketplaces where artists can go and sell their art to anyone in the world, right? And that is liberating. But yeah, so it's kind of like a bunch of jumbled thoughts I have on
No, you're
kind
fine.
of NFTs right now, but
Well,
uh,
it's
yeah,
the whole space is jumbled, right? I think it's okay to have the jumbled thoughts because I think something that came across my feed the other day was I think it was said 2017's ICOs or NFTs today or something like that, right? Like where the ICOs of 2017, you just mentioned it. It's like it kind of feels like the NFTs now, or it's kind of like the markets are getting a little overheated, a little too frothy, maybe, and it's everyone's questions how long can this bull run go, and it seems like all the experts I'm listening to on like people on Real Vision and your boss yourself is they're all saying, well, we're like halfway through the baseball game, right? Everyone loves that
yeah,
analogy of like fourth or
yeah,
fifth inning, something like that. And I'm like, okay, not looking at my portfolio right now, so we're gonna because the recent dip. But anyway, yeah, there's just so much volatility. Um, yeah, this was phenomenal. Thank you, Ryan, for stopping by with FinTech today, and and we hope we can have you on later on in time.
for sure. Thanks for having me on.